Namaste and greetings to Professor Diti Vyas ji. She is a professor at the School of Creative Practices and Entrepreneurship at Anant National University in Ahmedabad. Thank you so much, Diti ji, for joining us today, and I hope we can learn a lot from you about storytelling, writing, and communication.
Thank you so much, Aparna ji, for having me here. And Indica has been very close to my heart and soul. So it's a special added pleasure to be a part of Indica through this platform.
Wonderful. I was just going through some of the talks that you have given for Indica, and something that I found very interesting was the one on lullabies. And
Yes.
one of my favorites is Bombay Jayashree, who will be getting the Sangeeta Kalanidhi this year at the Music Academy, brought out an album called Vatsalya, which a lot of South Indian mothers play for their children. It's a collection of lullabies from different languages of India. So
Wonderful.
also, of course, she gave the voice for the very famous lullaby in the life of Pi. So could you tell us about lullabies in Gujarati? And what is it that makes it unique in the field of literature?
Aparna ji, just a second. There is a lot of noise happening at this end. Uh,
Yeah.
yes. Am I audible, Aparna ji?
Yes, yes, yes.
Ji.
Sure.
Ji.
So could you tell us about lullabies in Gujarati? And what is it about this genre that adds to our body of literature in India?
So we all know that lullabies are universal language, right? They are usually the words of the mother or grandmother or maternal aunt, a very feminine, feminist voice. Uh, in spite of this, lullabies are also reservoir or they are also a repository of these female voices which are very culturally grounded. So it's very vital to listen and understand while appreciating the universality of the genre. It is also very vital to decode these cultural elements and also particularly from the point of view of them being women's voices, right? Specifically, I were to talk about the lullabies in Gujarat. As a part of Indian Knowledge Systems project, we managed to collect, rather archive lullabies from various parts of Gujarat. So we primarily looked at north, south, east and west for directions, and accordingly we have lullabies from a city like Ahmedabad, Saurashtra, small villages like Dang. We're looking at Panchamahal. So we have this huge diversity in terms of the collection that we managed to put together. One of the parameters of selection was also the fact that these lullabies, the ones that we wanted to collect, should be orally alive. So we did not want to take anything that was digitally accessible. And a lot of these are very intimate songs, extremely intimate. So the ones that we see on digital platforms are largely popular, and there are a lot of Gujarati lullabies which are available. But there are community specific traditions in lullabies. There are language specific traditions in lullabies, and these need to be captured while we celebrate the spirit of motherhood universally. So, with this intent, when we went into the field, we found out that, of course, lullabies, though they were in Gujarati as a primary umbrella language, but they also had very strong dialectical connections. So, say for example, the lullabies that we collected from Panchamahal were in Rathvi dialect. The lullabies that we collected from Dang were in Dangi dialect. And these were though they do not have the accorded language status, but they are also completely different language, and they have their own ecosystem in terms of what are the words being used, what are the metaphors that come up, what are the similes that come up. So the kind of variety that we found in our collection was absolutely mind boggling. And what stood out prominently in the collection was, along with being a child directed genre. When I say child directed, it's meant ideally for a child to be put to sleep, right? So, along with being that, lullabies also were mother directed, which, and I have goosebumps when I say this, because we traditionally see lullabies as exclusively child focusing genres. So even if you look at the classification, the Western academia categorizes lullabies as children's literature, and they are the first lore available to the child. However, our traditional roots ensured that while it was meant for children, it had enough for the mother also. So these were the lullabies where mother is of course putting the child to sleep, and there are beautiful descriptions of the cradles and the silken thread and the ornamentation, all of that, and the sleep descriptions of sleep rituals. However, alongside that, the mother is also sharing her deepest impulses with the child, right? So there was a lullaby where she's talking about the problems of pregnancy. Now, usually we associate child lullaby with the child after it is born. But here is a time when the mothers, and these are Devaki and Yashoda, and I also find this very interesting because Mother Devaki is somebody who has lost so many children, right? And then she's talking to Mother Yashoda, and they are both talking about what happens in month one, what happens in month two, and entire 9 months have been catalogued so beautifully. So it's also not only about a female voice, but it's also about a female conversation. So a mother is talking to a mother, and you don't need to be a biological mother, essentially, in order to be a mother. So I think the whole idea of motherhood is so beautifully captured in these lullabies. Also, one of the conclusions which is extremely heartwarming is when we say mother, I'm using mother in the broadest sense of the term, where we're also talking about Mother Earth. So, lullabies which we found from the Adivasi and the tribal bells had so much discussions about flora and fauna, and you have the birds and animals creeping into the lullabies, and it almost became like a tale, an animal fable, but it was a lullaby. So and what was very beautiful was also the fact that while we venerate motherhood, there was also a full-hearted acceptance of various swaroops of the mother. So a mother is not only a giving, sacrificing, ever loving mother. A mother can also get angry. A mother can also sometimes chide the child. So it's so beautiful. You have Mother Gauri, and you have Mother Durga and Mother Kali. These are all mothers. There's no they're just swaroops. So that sort of plurality of mothers persona that we found there was fascinating. So there would be a lullaby which actually would confide the child that, say, I don't like your maternal aunt, she is very sly, or a lullaby that would say that my child, keep crying so that I don't have to do the work, So beautiful. I mean, a mother can be a human, right? So this is very beautifully expressed in the mother's voices. Also, very interesting twist that we found was Dang, especially one of the poorest of the regions that we worked with. And ironically, this place has, and I'm talking about poor in the sense of financial and economic poverty, but this was so culturally rich in terms of the mother care practices. So there were such beautiful rituals that we found in these lullabies, which were, a ritual of taking mother home after 5 days. Mother is being bathed in a certain way after she gives birth. Extremely mother caring lullabies came from the so-called poor region, which also questions, how we define poverty and richness on the basis of only financial resources. So, yeah, it was fantastic. The kind of results that we got. There were lullabies, which is also very fascinating, and I think that's an ongoing tradition that we have, where gods are treated as children. So we had lullabies of Rama and Krishna and Mahavir, and these are all like the divine is seen in the child, and the child in the divine is visible. So this is a tradition which has not been there anywhere in the world. So I remember when I went to Newcastle University for a presentation on this, there was actually somebody who asked me a question: Is there fear? Is the child shown as wicked? I said, never, never. That sort of magnanimity of who the mother is. You embrace her, but we celebrate her in the same way. Child in all the swaroops is embraced and celebrated, which I think speaks tons about the position of our country as the culturally rich country, the Bharatvarsha that we are all a part of.
So what about the music, Didi? Most of them tend to be because they are a night. First of all, it's sung at night, so they tend to have like in Hindustani music for the evening and night ragas. Usually, we sing certain ragas. So how was the music set to? Was it very similar?
So currently, we tried replicating the lullabies in their purest and the most natural form possible. So it did not have any accompaniments. We deliberated about this, whether we would want them to be audio recorded, but in a setting where it's a dim light, uh, maybe because the home has lights which are dimmed or dark to put the child to sleep, or in the poor homes where you don't even have the home per se, the mother puts her pallu over the child, and that becomes a little dark zone for the child. So we're looking at a setting where the reliance on music is extremely low, and it's just the tune which plays the game. So these tunes are very, very haunting in that sense of, they would stay with you for long. They are also extremely simple, most of them, and replicable. It also had specifically, if I were to talk about the Dangi lullabies, which also had, the dialect is a mix of Marathi and Gujarati. So it had a lot of onomatopoeic elements, so and there's a lot of repetitiveness, repeated rhythm. So very, very replicable sort of structure, which makes it extremely easy for anybody to pick it up and take it, rather than it being an exclusive terrain of trained singers, because all mothers are singers by default, because they have a listener always waiting for them, their child.
Yeah. So if we were to go from this to children's stories, which you
Yeah.
have also spoken about, and especially in pre-colonial times,
Yes.
what kind of changes are we seeing in writing for children? And since society itself has changed, children have changed, their, what we term as their imagination has changed because of all the introduction of gadgets and digital age.
Yeah.
So, if you, is there any one categorization which we can call as children's stories? Because there's been so much of change in society itself and how childhood is viewed and experienced.
Correct. So you're very right that children's literature evolves with time and it has to evolve with time. Very interestingly, again, here, uh, when we talk about the pre-colonial, we of course acknowledge the fact that we had Panchatantra and we had Kathasarit Sagara and we had these folk tales which were orally circulated. However, and this is coming from historical research, that the category of children's literature per se is something which has originated after we had an encounter with British children's literature primarily. So scholars have reiterated the fact that the entry of children's and apostrophe literature is British gave us shoes, they gave us newspapers. Similarly, children's literature is a borrowed category which is adapted. Now this is something that I find extremely problematic, because now if we look at the current debates, the contemporary debates in the world at large about children's literature, the scholars are pushing for expanding the boundaries of what we call children's literature, because children, number one, devour what the adults also read and view in the present parlance. So the whole category of children's also is a category that comes with the load of talking down, So I want to say that here is somebody, the author, who knows more, and you're talking somebody of a lesser age, necessarily not mature, to help the person grow into something else, right? However, the pre-colonial literature that we had, which was not branded as children's, but it had elements which were there for children to enjoy and to also partake and prepare for the life that is waiting for them. So the entire idea of shared content between the adults and the children, where you are empowering the child to pick up what he or she would like to. That sort of very, very empowered stance was visible in the pre-colonial body of writing, which is not there when we look at the current, and which of course the authors are trying now, to bring that empowerment. But there was a particular phase in the history of Indian children's literature where, moral per se became the big thing. You want to pass it on, and the condescending tone is what people were worried about. And then the whole transition that we are talking about in terms of, from morals to entertainment, that we now are claiming that is a prerogative of modern children's literature, I feel was very much there. So indirectly, now we're probably going back to roots and doing what our predecessors might have done long back with all the knowledge that they had. Also, this whole idea of tabula rasa, where you feel that a child is an empty vessel and you fill the child up with all the gyan that you can think of, has never been there in our culture, right? So we always thought child was a Nachiketa, child was Ashtavakra, who came up with their own sanskaras. And when we talk about this, I mean, there's a very innate trust in the sanskaras that a child brings. So that intersects with the sanskaras that you give, I mean, which happens within the family. So that notion, I think, gave that sense of empowerment to the child, and the respect to a child as a category, not as a young adult who needs to grow up one day, but respect child as a child, which was already there. So the modern literature, if you were to now, talk about, and since you said what are the changes that have come up, is trying to duplicate this. So there are very, very serious themes that children's literature now tackles. You have works which talk about environmentalism. You have works which talk about climate change related issues. You have works which very clearly vocalize the idea of female feticide. And there's a brilliant book by Ranjit Lal on this. So there are works that talk about, what happens after an apocalypse, what happens when destructive war happens. And these are all children's books. But children of that era who would have seen the Ramayana and Mahabharata performed would have learned this so naturally,
Mm.
and they would have learned to pick up what is right for them, because stories were meant to be told and not read. This is also something which I think is a very, very valuable difference between the way we consume, our children consume stories today, vis-a-vis our predecessors as children would consume. So anything that is told, while it has a structure, it also has a flexibility of interjections. I
Mm.
can customize what I want as per the requirements of my listener. So I think the
Mm.
whole tradition of storytelling needs to come back in such a powerful way that you are bringing in these real shades of the world, yet making the child strong enough to pick and choose and to take a stance.
And storytelling also was not only through text, Diti. We had stage shows, we had puppetry, we had music, we had traveling, performers. We had regional variations like Yakshagana in Karnataka and Teyams in Kerala.
Yes.
So now have we become, directional where we're only reliant on text and maybe at the most movies.
Yeah, you're very right,
So is
and
the
it's
oral
a very
tradition,
yeah. Sorry, please go ahead.
so is the oral tradition, the role of the oral tradition where we listen to stories, is that something that we are losing? And in Indian languages, when the sound disappears, what are we losing?
When the sound disappears, a lot is lost, because the story is important, but the telling is also important. Both these are equally important terms, and when you talk about the science of storytelling, it's also something that heals. So the act of telling is also the act of clarifying, the act of being intimate. It is also an act of responding and reacting. I mean, when there's a book that I am reading, with all due respect, books are important, but they cannot supplement the interactive storytelling that we have. So the stories, if you look at the folk ones or the told stories, also have spaces for the listeners to come back. So there are also lullabies where I found that the mother is saying, if you agree to me, can you respond with a babble? So there are these spaces which are interwoven in the telling itself, which gives enough power to the listener to come back and interact and to make it my story. Now here, if you have an objective, standardized, uniform format for everybody, that sort of customization somewhere goes out of the picture. Right, and that's actually a very big loss when we talk about the impact overall. You might always say that we have audiovisual mediums, and these days we have the audio devices which do the job. You have your Alexa tell a story for you, but the Alexa will not customize the story the way my grandmother would. So the same story, and I'm sure we all have grown up with these stories which we repeatedly hear from our elders, and we still would love to go back to them, because every time you listen to them, there's something that has changed which I might not have imagined. So that sort of uh, you know beauty of slight changes and familiarity, the unfamiliar and familiar every time, it is extremely psychologically comforting for a child, which only a telling can give. Yeah, while we all respect the stories which are written, we also have to practice the stories which are told.
So you also give lectures and speak to non-Indians in Western universities. So when we're talking about writing and communication, and this is something that comes up in Indic circles, is there an Indic style of writing which is not, in the mainstream media and which is largely kept out of mainstream medias? So, how do we establish that Indian identity in writing where we use words which cannot be translated into English and also themes which are not, necessarily relatable in English? How do we create a style where internationally it is accepted and used the way we would want our languages to be used?
Yeah. Very vital question, and something that I've been consciously striving to do. So, one of the things that I have discovered uh, with all these years of interaction with Western academia is one image that, at least till one point of time, kept coming back to me of Indians is, so I remember when my first article was invited. I mean, it was an invited article. The gentleman read my thesis and he said, "Why don't you write?" And he wrote very clearly that this is the first article from India that will be ever published in this journal. And the journal had a long run, you know. So the whole idea that quality is the label that maybe the quality is not there, the rigor is not there, is actually a myth. Also, the young researchers, when they are working, uh, I think going back to our shastras, which is so important, is if you look at something like Shiva Suktas, you have a verse which is so tightly packed. There is so much brevity that you cannot reduce anything out of it. So that writing tightly rather than rambling is something that we can all learn from our scriptures. The second thing which I think, in terms of writing skill, which we need to really learn is, and I see this brilliantly time and again done in the scriptures, multiple of them, where we have a word, and that word is so beautifully defined, annotated, and operationalized. And we, as researchers overall, when I also review articles, I realize that there we are now in the habit of loose talking sometimes. We use a word, we say empathy, and we assume that it's a word known by everybody. We don't get to the ground of it and break it and see how do you do a definition of that term. So I think, whatever I have read in terms of shastras, these definitional aspects are so beautifully covered. That is one thing, if we bring it in our research, it would completely take our evidence based understanding to a very next level. And our if you're looking at Sanskrit authors, if you're looking at scholars, have already done this. If you look at Panini's Vyakaran, each term is defined so beautifully and explicated with examples, that we need so many annotations to even get to the heart of what has been talked about. Or even if you look at Bhagavad Gita, say for example, I mean, the whole idea of Sthita Prajna being so beautifully explained, defined, operationalized. That's the research term that we use all throughout. So it's so vital that while we study the content of our shastras, we also should imbibe the style that they use in order to make any argumentation. And honestly, I have been following this, and I have always felt that, the whole idea that some people say that, the journals are edited by foreign reviewers, and they don't understand what we are doing, and therefore the rejection happens. I would disagree with that, because the content, if you are presenting in a certain way, it holds so strong argument that you cannot ignore. So it's about the style of bringing evidence based writing into practice, which helps and acceptance. So I've taught language and communication, but I think it's so important that I've also held on to my roots in a very big way. So
Mm.
it's very important that you know the language in order to get what you have, the treasure that you have, to a larger public, so they also admire and appreciate and revere what you have with you. You cannot lose stock and say my work is great and be jingoistic about it and make an argument. You have to make an analytical argument to reach out to them. So just to give an example, last year we had won an award for writing a case study, which is a teaching tool in business schools across. And there is, of course, a huge prominence given to the Western setup case studies. So Harvard is, the hotbed of case studies and Ivy and all of that. So we did a case study on a local Kutchi artisan, and he makes leather bags, right?
Mm.
So, and a very small artisan, and he doesn't know English. So we worked on a case study, stayed with his family for long, admired the way he works, and how he carries forward the tradition. And this case won an award at an international publication forum, right? It was purely Indian content, but
Mm.
it was presented in a way that spoke to them. And
Mm.
that is what I think is required in order to put us ourselves. We already are, we are already so rich in multiple ways, but it's very important that we showcase that richness also.
Yeah. So, and when we talk about storytelling in the Indian context, Diti, most stories are based on urban settings. Most
Yeah.
Indian writing in English is about sensibilities in urban India. So, how do we, unlike in the regional languages where we still, hold on to this local stories, local language, local narratives? How do we make this shift in the English language? Is it something that is lacking in the writers, or is it that, we are assuming that those who read in English will want to consume only urban content?
So that statement is something that I agree and disagree both. Yes, the Indian English author is somebody who is grounded in the sensibilities of the urban middle class, upper middle class setup. Also, the readers, when you're talking about who's going to read in English, these are school going children who probably are living in the comfort of their homes. Their parents have enough money to buy things for them, including books. So we are looking at an essential market connect that happens when you are dealing with English language books. So it's also as much a publication game as much it is an author sensibility coming up. Um, Having said that, I would also mention that these days the whole barrier between English versus regional languages is breaking down in a very big way. So, say if you're looking at a publisher like Tulika, a publisher like Pratham, they do multi-language books. So you have one book which has a picture, and you have the book being translated into
Mm.
three languages side by side, which
Mm.
breaks down these barriers. And the more we tap into these multi-language scenarios, we
Mm.
also are writing for public readership, which is not only an urban child. Which consists of a rural child, a setup that is non-metro setup. Those are, and there are works which have started already happening in this direction. So we do find that not, of course, to that level that we wanted, but we do find that there is an emergence of the rural and the village, which is also coming up in a very beautiful way, equalizing and including variety of people. But ultimately, it's the game of readership. So you see, the child in the book is the reflection of the child outside, who is the reader, and you will constantly see those resonances happening. The other channel which I think until now that was working was regional language books were supported because they did not have anybody to really sort of hold on and read. They were like not bought. Even the whole fad about speaking in English is so high that parents, when they would have spare money, they would not want to buy a book in a regional language. They would want it in English, because the ultimate goal would be at least the language will be learned. That's the aspiration. So and therefore, going back again, veering to English language books and going away from the regional. So the regional books were supported by some random buying that would happen, and rare buying that would happen at retail level, and textbook boards would support the regional writing and include them, and the state would buy these books, and through the channels they would send it through their own channels. They were sent to the schools per se. So that also makes this whole disconnect. There's so many adults involved in the whole process that a child is not picking up something directly. So it's also very vital that the regional language books and the rural setting books also look equally enchanting as the other ones. And the moment they look enchanting, I mean, which means good quality of production, good investment in terms of colors and all of that, that would sort of bring them at par. By the way, when I'm saying this, let me also say that Hindi has been one of the largest producers of for children's literature. So it's not only that; it's also the other factors that come into play.
Thank you so much, Diti, for your time and for sharing all this valuable information. And we look forward to having more conversations and more engagement with India.
Absolutely, it was a pleasure, Aparnaji, to meet you online, and thank you, Indika, for inviting me.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Namaste.